The God Delusion, by Richard Dawkins. Introduction. In the year 1858, in the quiet city of Bologna, Italy, a 6-year-old boy named Edgardo Mortara was playing in his home. He was a happy child, loved by his Jewish parents, unaware that his life was about to be shattered. One evening, the papal police arrived at their door. They had orders from the Inquisition to take the boy. His mother wept, his father pleaded, but it was no use. Edgardo was forcibly taken from his family, transported to Rome, and raised as a Roman Catholic. His parents would never truly see him again. Why? What crime had this child committed? Years earlier, when Edgardo was just a baby, he had fallen ill. The family's young, illiterate Catholic maid, Anna, panicked. She had been taught that if a child died without being baptized, their soul would be lost to hell for eternity. So, in secret, she sprinkled water on the baby's head and whispered the words, "I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost." And that was it. In the eyes of the Church, that simple, secret act made the child a Christian. To allow a Christian child to be raised by his own Jewish parents was, to them, unthinkable. A cardinal explained it simply: the sacred duties of religion are more powerful than the voice of nature. This story, as heartbreaking as it is, opens a door to one of the most profound questions of our time. A question that biologist and author Richard Dawkins dared to ask in his explosive 2006 bestseller, The God Delusion. The book sold millions of copies and ignited a global firestorm of debate, because it didn't just question a single religion, it questioned the very foundation of faith itself. Dawkins, a brilliant Oxford scientist, approached the idea of God not as a matter of faith, but as a scientific hypothesis, something to be examined, tested, and questioned with the same rigor we apply to the natural world. So what if we did that? What if we set aside what we've been told to believe, and instead, just for a little while, looked at the world through the eyes of a scientist? That is the journey this book invites us to take. And I promise you, by the end of our time together, you will understand why one of the world's most brilliant minds believes that letting go of God isn't about losing something, but about gaining a universe of wonder. This isn't a story about anger or denial. It's a story about intellectual courage, and the beautiful, awe-inspiring world that science reveals when we have the courage to look. Book summary. Have you ever wondered why religion seems to get a special kind of respect? If someone says they believe the world is flat, we're free to argue, to show them evidence, to call their idea nonsense. But if someone says, "I believe in God," a hush falls over the room. We're taught to nod politely and say, "I respect that." It's this strange, unwritten rule that Richard Dawkins begins to unravel. He asks a simple question: why should religious ideas be protected from the same kind of scrutiny we apply to everything else in our lives? To start this journey, he wants us to be very clear about what we mean by God. He's not talking about the vague, poetic idea of God as a metaphor for the beauty of the universe, the kind of God Albert Einstein sometimes referred to. Einstein once said, "I do not believe in a personal God. If something is in me which can be called religious, then it is the unbounded admiration for the structure of the world so far as our science can reveal it." Dawkins feels that same sense of awe. He calls it an Einsteinian religion. It's the feeling you get when you look up at the Milky Way on a clear night, a sense of transcendent wonder at the vastness and elegance of the cosmos. But, he argues, calling that feeling God is confusing. For most people, throughout history, God has meant something very specific: a supernatural, superhuman intelligence who deliberately designed and created the universe and everything in it. This, Dawkins says, is the God hypothesis. And the central argument of his book is that this hypothesis can, and should, be treated like any other scientific claim. It's a statement about the universe. And like any statement about the universe, we should be able to examine the evidence for it. So, let's do that. Let's walk through the old, time-honored arguments that people have used for centuries to prove God's existence. For nearly 1,000 years, the arguments of the 13th century theologian Thomas Aquinas were considered the gold standard. He offered 5 proofs, but the first 3 are really just variations on the same idea. They go something like this: everything that moves must have been set in motion by something else. Every effect must have a cause. And if things exist now, something must have brought them into existence in the first place. You can follow this chain of movers, causes, and creations backward in time, but it can't go on forever. Sooner or later, you must arrive at a first mover, a first cause, an original creator. And that, Aquinas says, we call God. At first glance, this seems logical. But Dawkins asks us to pause and think for a second. If we say that everything needs a cause, and then we invent God to be the first cause, we've created a new problem. Who caused God? If we're allowed to simply declare that God is the one thing that doesn't need a cause, why can't we just say the same thing about the universe itself? Why not just say the universe was the uncaused first thing? By inventing God, we haven't solved the mystery, we've just pushed it back one step. And more than that, we've replaced a simple mystery, what started the universe, with a much, much bigger one: what started an all-powerful, all-knowing, infinitely complex being. It's like trying to explain a difficult puzzle by saying, a wizard did it. It doesn't actually explain anything. Aquinas' fourth proof, the argument from degree, is even stranger. He says that we see things in the world that have degrees of goodness or perfection. But we can only judge something as more perfect if we have an ultimate standard of maximum perfection to compare it to. That maximum perfection, he concludes, must be God. Dawkins finds this argument so weak it's almost funny. As he points out, you could use the exact same logic for anything. People vary in how smelly they are. Does that mean there must exist a maximally perfect smelly being to act as the ultimate standard? Of course not. It's just a word game. But it's the fifth proof, the argument from design, that has had the most staying power. This is the one you still hear all the time. It's the idea that when you look at the world, especially living things, they just look designed. An eye, with its lens, its iris, its retina, it works like a beautifully crafted camera. A bird's wing is a marvel of aerodynamic engineering. Surely, something so complex and so perfectly suited to its purpose couldn't have come about by chance. It must have had a designer. This was the argument that once convinced a young Charles Darwin. But it was the mature Darwin who, in Dawkins's view, provided the most devastating and elegant answer in all of human thought. Before Darwin, design and chance seemed like the only two options. Either the eye was made by a creator, or it was assembled by a miraculous stroke of luck. But Darwin gave us a third way: evolution by natural selection. Natural selection is not a theory of chance. It's the very opposite. It's a cumulative process that breaks down the impossible problem of creating an eye into a series of tiny, achievable steps. Imagine a mountain with a sheer cliff face on one side and a long, gentle slope on the other. Trying to create an eye in one go is like trying to leap to the summit in a single bound. It's impossible. But natural selection is like walking around to the back of the mountain and taking the gentle path, one small step at a time. It starts with something simple, maybe a patch of light-sensitive cells. Any creature with a slightly better patch, one that's a little more cupped, perhaps, allowing it to sense the direction of light, will have a slight advantage. Over millions of years, and countless generations, these tiny advantages accumulate. The cup gets deeper, a simple lens forms, the focus sharpens. Each step is small, plausible, and driven by the non-random process of survival. What looks like a miracle of design is actually the result of a long, slow climb up Mount Improbable. But the most famous argument of all, at least among philosophers, is the ontological argument, first proposed by St. Anselm in the 11th century. It's a pure piece of armchair logic, and it's so tricky that for a moment, it even convinced the great philosopher Bertrand Russell. Dawkins translates this infantile argument into the language of the playground, and it goes something like this. Imagine the most perfect thing you can possibly think of. Got it? Okay. Now, does that perfect thing exist in reality, or only in your mind? If you say it only exists in your mind, Anselm has a clever trap for you. He says, but a thing that exists in reality is more perfect than a thing that only exists in your imagination. So the truly most perfect thing must exist in reality. And just like that, he claims to have proven that God exists. It's a clever word game, but that's all it is. As Dawkins and many other philosophers have pointed out, you can't just define something into existence. You could use the same logic to prove the existence of a perfect island, or a perfect pizza. The argument assumes that existence is a quality of perfection, like being all-powerful or all-knowing. But as the philosopher Immanuel Kant pointed out, existence isn't a quality of a thing, it's just whether the thing is. Saying a house will be better if it exists than if it doesn't is just a strange way of talking. So, if these ancient arguments don't hold up, what are we left with? Many people turn to personal experience. They say, I know God exists because I feel Him in my heart, or I saw a vision, or God spoke to me. Dawkins treats this with gentle skepticism. Our brains, he explains, are powerful simulation machines. They don't just passively receive information from our eyes and ears, they actively construct a model of reality. And sometimes, that simulation software gets it wrong. We've all seen faces in the clouds or heard a voice in the wind. That's our brain's pattern recognition software working a little too well. Our minds are so good at creating faces and voices that they can do it even when there's nothing there. Religious experiences, he suggests, are often powerful hallucinations or illusions, created by the same brain software that produces our dreams at night. The experience feels incredibly real to the person having it, just as a dream feels real while you're in it. But it's not convincing evidence for anyone else. Peter Sutcliffe, the infamous Yorkshire Ripper, claimed that the voice of Jesus told him to kill women. We don't take his personal experience as proof of divine command, we recognize it as a symptom of a deeply disturbed mind. What about the Bible? Couldn't the scriptures be our evidence? Dawkins points out what biblical scholars have known for over a century. The Gospels are not reliable historical accounts. They were written decades after the events they describe, by anonymous authors who likely never met Jesus. They contradict each other on major points, like the story of Jesus' birth. Matthew says Mary and Joseph lived in Bethlehem all along, while Luke has them living in Nazareth and creates a historically impossible story about a Roman census to get them to Bethlehem, just to fulfill an old prophecy. The Bible, Dawkins argues, is a collection of legends, myths, and moral teachings cobbled together over centuries. It's a fascinating work of literature that has shaped our culture, but it's not a factual record of history. To treat it as such is like trying to write a history of England based on the legends of King Arthur. This brings us to the heart of Dawkins' own argument, the core idea of the God Delusion. He calls it the ultimate Boeing 747 gambit. The argument for religion often rests on improbability. The universe, life, a human eye, they are all so incredibly complex and improbable that they couldn't have arisen by chance. As the astronomer Fred Hoyle once famously said, the chance of life emerging on Earth is about the same as the chance that a hurricane sweeping through a scrapyard could assemble a Boeing 747. Dawkins agrees. The chance is vanishingly small. A 747 is an incredibly improbable object. So is a human being. So is an eye. The problem of improbability is the central question that any theory of existence must answer. The religious answer is to invoke a designer. But here, Dawkins says, is where the logic completely collapses. If you are trying to explain the existence of something complex and improbable like a universe or an eye, you can't do it by proposing something even more complex and improbable, a divine designer. Think about it. A being capable of designing a universe, of fine-tuning the laws of physics, of hearing every prayer and reading every thought? Such a being would have to be staggeringly complex. Far more complex than the universe it created. God, Dawkins says, is the ultimate Boeing 747. The religious argument doesn't solve the problem of improbability. It just creates an infinitely bigger one. It explains nothing. It's what the philosopher Daniel Dennett calls a skyhook, a magical, miraculous explanation that hangs from nothing and explains nothing. What we need is a crane, a grounded natural process that can lift complexity up from simplicity, step by gradual step. Darwin's natural selection is the ultimate crane for biology. It's a slow, gradual, cumulative process that explains how the staggering complexity of life can arise from simple beginnings, without any need for a designer. What about physics and the universe itself? We don't have a crane as powerful as Darwinism for cosmology yet. But physicists are working on it. Some propose the multiverse theory, the idea that our universe is just one of countless bubble universes, each with slightly different laws of physics. Most of these universes are dead ends, incapable of supporting life. But with so many universes in existence, it's statistically inevitable that a few, by pure chance, would have the Goldilocks conditions just right for stars, planets, and life to emerge. And, of course, we would have to find ourselves in one of those lucky few, because we couldn't exist anywhere else to ask the question. This is called the anthropic principle. It might seem extravagant to imagine billions of other universes. But Dawkins argues it's actually a far simpler and more logical explanation than proposing one single, infinitely complex, super-intelligent divine knob-twiddler who needs no explanation at all. A multiverse of simple universes is a crane. A single, complex God is a skyhook. And that, in its essence, is the argument that leads Dawkins to conclude that God almost certainly does not exist. But this raises another set of questions, doesn't it? If there is no God, why is religion so universal? And perhaps more importantly, if there is no God, why are we good? Where does our sense of morality come from? Dawkins suggests we might be asking the wrong question. He proposes that religion isn't something that was directly selected for in our evolution. Instead, it's a byproduct of other things that were useful. He uses a beautiful analogy, a moth flying into a candle flame. Why do moths do this? It's not suicide. Moths evolved over millions of years to navigate by using a distant light source, like the moon. They keep the light at a constant angle to their eye, and it helps them fly in a straight line. This is a very useful rule of thumb. But when a moth encounters a nearby light source, like a candle, the same rule of thumb causes it to fly in a spiral, straight into the flame. The behavior isn't useful. It's a tragic misfiring of a once useful instinct. What if religion is like that? What if it's a byproduct of useful mental traits that have gone wrong? Dawkins' main suggestion is our childhood gullibility. As children, we are incredibly vulnerable. We can't survive by learning everything from scratch. We have to trust what our parents and elders tell us. Don't eat those red berries. Don't go near the cliff edge. Don't play with fire. A child's brain that has the built-in rule, believe whatever your parents tell you, without question, has a huge survival advantage. But this useful gullibility has a flip side. It makes the child's mind vulnerable to being infected with any idea, good or bad. The child can't distinguish between don't swim in the crocodile-infested river and you must sacrifice a goat at the full moon. Both pieces of information come from a trusted source, delivered with the same solemn authority. So, irrational ideas, like the belief in invisible gods, ancestral spirits, or life after death, can get passed down from generation to generation like a mind virus, piggybacking on the brain's natural and very useful tendency to trust. This would explain why religion is so widespread, and also why a person's religion almost always matches that of their parents. A child born in Arkansas is overwhelmingly likely to be a Christian. If that same child had been born in Afghanistan, she would be just as certain that Islam is the one true faith. It's not a matter of evidence, it's a matter of childhood indoctrination. Other evolutionary psychologists have suggested other byproducts. Perhaps our brains have a hyperactive agent detection device. In our evolutionary past, it was safer to assume that a rustle in the grass was a lion than to assume it was just the wind. This tendency to see intention and agency everywhere could easily lead us to imagine spirits in the clouds and gods controlling the weather. Or perhaps, as the psychologist Paul Bloom suggests, we are natural-born dualists. Children instinctively feel that the mind is separate from the body, a ghost in the machine. This makes the idea of a soul that can survive death, or a God that exists as pure spirit, feel intuitively natural. These ideas, which spread and stick in our minds, Dawkins calls memes. A meme is a unit of culture, an idea, a catchphrase, a melody, a fashion, that passes from mind to mind through imitation, much like a gene passes from body to body through replication. Some memes are better at surviving and spreading than others. The idea of life after death is a very successful meme, because it appeals directly to our deep-seated fear of dying. The idea that faith, believing without evidence, is a virtue is another brilliant survival trick for a meme. It protects the idea from being questioned or challenged by reason. Religions, then, can be seen as vast collections of mutually compatible memes, or memplexes. A memeplex like Catholicism or Islam includes memes about an afterlife, rewards for martyrdom, the virtue of faith, the evil of apostasy, and rituals that create a strong sense of group identity. These ideas all work together to reinforce each other and ensure their own survival from one generation to the next. This brings us to the final, and for many, the most important question. If we are just products of evolution, and our moral sense is just a set of evolved rules of thumb, what's to stop us from being selfish and horrible to each other? If there is no God, as Dostoevsky's character Ivan Karamazov famously worried, everything is permitted. Dawkins argues that this is perhaps the biggest misunderstanding of all. We don't need God to be good. Our morality has deep roots in our Darwinian past. He outlines 4 main reasons why natural selection would have favored the evolution of altruism and kindness. First is kin selection. Genes for altruism can spread if the altruism is directed at relatives who are likely to share the same genes. This is why we feel such a powerful urge to protect our children and help our family. It's selfish genes programming unselfish behavior in individuals. Second is reciprocal altruism. You scratch my back, and I'll scratch yours. In a social group where you interact with the same individuals over and over, it pays to build relationships of trust and cooperation. Natural selection will favor those who are good at giving help, remembering who helped them, and punishing those who cheat the system. Third is the importance of reputation. In a society with language and gossip, it's not enough to be a good cooperator. You also have to be known as a good cooperator. Having a reputation for kindness and generosity makes others more likely to help you in the future. And fourth is what the zoologist Amot Zahavi calls conspicuous generosity. Being altruistic can be a way of advertising your superiority and status. It's like saying, "Look how wealthy and powerful I am." I can afford to be generous. This buys you respect and makes you more attractive as a mate or an ally. For most of our history, we lived in small, tight-knit groups where these four forces would have been incredibly powerful. We evolved a strong, built-in instinct for kindness, empathy, and cooperation within our in-group. But today, we live in huge cities, surrounded by strangers we'll never see again. Why are we still good to them? Dawkins suggests it's another misfiring, but this time, a blessed, precious mistake. Our evolved rules of thumb? Be kind to others. Feel empathy for those who are suffering. Don't just switch off when we're surrounded by strangers. They're like our sex drive. We can know intellectually that sex is for procreation, and we can use contraception, but that doesn't diminish our desire. The urge is independent of its original evolutionary purpose. In the same way, the urge to be good, to feel pity for a stranger, to help someone in need, is a deep part of our evolved nature. It's a misfired instinct from our ancestral past, but it's one of the things that makes us most human. Our morality doesn't come from the Bible. If it did, Dawkins points out, we would be a very different people. The Old Testament God is, in his famous words, arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser. This is a God who orders the genocide of entire tribes, demands the sacrifice of a beloved son, and prescribes the death penalty for working on the Sabbath or cursing your parents. We don't get our morals from Scripture. Even religious people pick and choose the nice bits of the Bible and ignore the horrible parts. But how do they decide which bits are nice? They use an external standard of morality, one that comes from somewhere else. That somewhere else, Dawkins argues, is the moral zeitgeist, the spirit of the times. Over the centuries, our collective moral consciousness has steadily moved in a more liberal and humane direction. We abolished slavery. We gave women the right to vote. We came to see racism and homophobia as wrong. These changes didn't come from religion. In many cases, they happened in spite of it. They came from moral reflection, philosophical debate, and a growing circle of empathy. Our morals are not fixed and absolute. They evolve, and thankfully, they have been evolving for the better. So why be hostile to religion? Isn't it just a bit of harmless nonsense? Dawkins argues that it's not harmless. He sees a direct line from moderate faith to dangerous extremism. The moderate, mainstream teaching that faith, belief without evidence, is a virtue, he says, is what makes the world safe for fundamentalism. If you teach children that it's good to believe something with all your heart, even when there's no good reason for it, you are priming them to be vulnerable to any charismatic leader who comes along with a powerful and dangerous message. The teachings of moderate religion, he says, are an open invitation to extremism. Voltaire said it best, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." The suicide bomber doesn't blow himself up because he is evil. He does it because he has been taught, from childhood, that he has a sacred duty, and that he will be rewarded with a glorious afterlife. He truly, passionately believes it. And that belief was not necessarily taught to him by a wild-eyed extremist, but by the same gentle, mainstream religious teachers who taught him to be kind to his mother and honest in his dealings. The problem isn't the extremism, it's the faith itself. This leads to what Dawkins sees as the greatest harm of all, the indoctrination of children. He argues that it is a form of mental abuse to label a small child as a Christian child or a Muslim child. A child is too young to have decided on their views about the cosmos, morality, and existence. They are a child of Christian parents or a child of Muslim parents, but the child himself has not yet chosen. To label a child with their parents' beliefs, he says, is to cripple their minds and deny them the right to think for themselves when they are old enough to do so. So, If religion is taken away, what is left? Does life become empty, meaningless, and cold? This, Dawkins says, is the final and most profound misunderstanding. Letting go of God doesn't mean letting go of wonder, mystery, or awe. It means finding those things where they truly exist, in the real world. Science, he argues, is not the enemy of wonder, it is the gateway to it. It is the mother of all burkas. He asks us to imagine that the visible light our eyes can see is just a tiny, 1-inch slit in a vast black garment that stretches for miles in either direction, representing the full electromagnetic spectrum. Science is the act of tearing open that burqa, allowing us to see the universe in radio waves, X-rays, and gamma rays. It allows us to see the world as it really is, a place far stranger, more beautiful, and more awe-inspiring than any of the ancient myths could have ever imagined. We live on a planet, he writes, that is a speck of debris from a cosmic explosion, circling a nuclear fireball 90 million miles away. Every atom in our bodies was forged in the heart of an ancient, exploding star. We are, in a very real sense, made of stardust. And through the improbable process of evolution, that stardust has woken up. It has become conscious. It has developed the ability to look back at the universe that created it and to wonder, to understand, and to feel a profound sense of awe. An atheist, for Dawkins, is not someone who lives in a cold, meaningless world. An atheist is someone who has woken up to the staggering, breathtaking reality of the universe. The knowledge that we have only one life makes that life infinitely more precious. To waste it on fantasies of an afterlife is to miss the glorious opportunity that has been given to us. The world is not empty, it is full of a grandeur that, in his words, can fill the inspirational role that religion has historically, and inadequately, usurped. To be an atheist is not something to be ashamed of. It is something to be proud of, standing tall to face the far horizon. Commentary. So, what do we take away from this powerful, and for many, challenging journey? The God Delusion is more than just an argument against religion. It's a passionate love letter to reality. At its heart, it's a call for us to open our eyes to the universe as it is, not as we wish it to be, and to find our meaning and our inspiration right here, in the one life we know we have. The most powerful lesson, I think, is the idea of intellectual courage. Dawkins shows us that it's okay to question. In fact, it's more than okay. It's our greatest tool for discovering truth. In a world that so often tells us to accept things on faith, he reminds us that the most profound aha moments in life come not from believing without evidence, but from following the evidence wherever it leads, no matter how uncomfortable that might be at first. He teaches us that the words "I don't know" are not a sign of weakness, but the very starting point of all discovery. A religious mind might see a gap in our knowledge, like the origin of life, and rush to fill it with God. Dawkins shows us that a scientific mind sees that same gap and feels a thrill of excitement, because it represents a new frontier to explore, a new mystery to solve. It's the difference between being satisfied with a simple answer and falling in love with a beautiful question. And what about morality? The idea that our sense of goodness is not handed down from on high, but is woven into our very biology by our evolutionary past, is a deeply empowering one. It means that kindness, empathy, and cooperation are not commands we must obey, but are a fundamental part of who we are. We don't need a celestial surveillance camera to be good. Goodness is our natural inheritance. So, how can we apply these ideas in our own lives, starting today? First, try this simple thought experiment. The next time you feel a sense of awe, maybe watching a sunset, listening to a beautiful piece of music, or looking up at the stars, pause for a moment. Instead of attributing that feeling to something supernatural, try to connect it to the reality of what you're seeing. Think about the physics of light scattering through the atmosphere to create those colors. Think about the billions of years of cosmic history that led to that starlight reaching your eye. Think about the intricate workings of the human brain that allow those sound waves to be translated into emotion. See if you can feel how understanding something more deeply doesn't diminish its beauty, but actually enhances it. Second, practice the art of questioning with kindness. You don't have to become confrontational. But when you hear a claim that is presented without evidence, whether it's religious, political, or just everyday gossip, get into the habit of asking yourself a gentle question. What is the evidence for that? Just training your mind to ask that simple question is the first step toward the kind of clear, rational thinking that Dawkins champions. It's about building a mind that is open to wonder, but skeptical of dogma. That was a summary of the God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. We've journeyed through the core of his arguments today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only ever be a map. The real adventure happens when you explore the territory for yourself. It's in the quiet moments, when a particular story or a simple, elegant idea connects with you in a way you didn't expect. This podcast is designed to help you decide if this book is worth your time and attention. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity or challenged you to think, I urge you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning a set of arguments, it's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see the universe, your place in it, and the precious gift of your own conscious mind. The link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this summary valuable and it gave you a new perspective, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It tells us we're on the right track, and it ensures you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.